Now, I believe that underlying all of these forces and underlying the views and opinions that we get caught in is a force that's more powerful even than greed or hatred. And that's really the force of fear. And we might look at how deeply that runs our lives. When people come to meditation retreats and they start to get quiet and there's this process of the body opening up and the mind letting go, and there's 10 days or a month of silence and really being with yourself with no distraction, at some point fear will arise. It's inevitable. Fear is kind of the membrane between what we know and something new. And usually when people get down to it, there are only three fears. The fear of dying, the fear of going crazy, and the fear of loss of control in some way, which it turns out are all the same fear. It's really a deep fear somehow of letting go. So we sit, or we do practice, or we look at our lives and these forces of greed or fear or prejudice or whatever, and we begin to listen, if you can, to how this fear creates attachment to our views. It's not the views that are the problem, but how we get caught in them. Now, I don't want to talk generally, but what are our personal views? Your religious views, your political, your social, your personal. How do we use these views, our attachment to them, to keep ourselves separate? To make a stronger sense of self. To serve as barriers, maybe because we're afraid of getting overwhelmed. How are our views used as a defense? In what ways? Or to what extent is our ego, our false sense of self, built around our opinions and views? To practice is to begin to investigate the nature of ourself and our world and see what creates barriers, what creates suffering. See our false self. The separateness and the fights and the wars that come from it. See its pain. And to sense another way, what's called the don't know mind by one Zen master. That we can let go of those things. This is Gertrude Stein. There ain't no answer. There ain't going to be an answer. There's never been an answer. That's the answer. Now, how can we work with our views or our opinions, or in fact with passion or that overwhelms us? I don't mean healthy passion, but passion as obsession, or greed, or fear, or addiction, or hatred. The key tool that the Buddha recommended, and that is part of this path, this spiritual life, is wakefulness or mindfulness, awareness, seeing clearly. Mindfulness means to be aware of what is present without reacting to it with greed or hatred or delusion. Now, how can we use that in our daily life or retreats? It's really much the same. Suppose some view or opinion arises and you're very attached to it and stuck on it. Or your anger, or your fear, or greed arises. How can you work with it as part of your spiritual life and become free, not some other lifetime, but now? The first thing that's necessary is to recognize it. Not a small thing. To recognize that it is a view that you're attached to, or an opinion, rather than the truth. Truth is kind of invisible, particularly when we hold it. We're so connected with it that it seems obvious. I don't know why everybody else doesn't see it this way, which is, of course, my way. So the purpose of all of these talks, in some way, is to get people to look in themselves and begin to question. And I give you a lot of questions in the talk. What are your views? How do you create barriers with them? How do you create struggle or conflict? Some people at retreats tell me, I've done it myself, they give themselves little Dharma talks through the day. They'll sit and they'll walk and there's a little voice in here giving them a little Dharma monologue. It's kind of like Winnie the Pooh who sings songs to himself as he does things. There's a great tradition of it. There was one Zen master, I don't remember if it was Hakuin or whoever he was, who used to talk to himself all the time. He'd say, Hakuin, yes? Wake up today, I'll try. And there would be these little dialogues talking to himself. So the first step that we have to do is to ask the question, what's here? And recognize it. What is actually here that's going on? And a good signal of the time to ask that question is when you're suffering. If you're suffering, that's a good moment to say, what's going on? And that's how you pay attention without so much delusion. What is here? It's waking up. And beginning to really say what is there. Reporter, were you apprehensive in the 12th inning? Yogi Berra, no, but I was scared. It's not fancy, it's not apprehensive, it's not all psychological jargon. I was scared, I was terrified. To tell the truth, there is fear here. That's what I find, fear at times, or vulnerability, or anger, or pain, or hurt. I feel hurt. There's grief. There's loneliness. There's shame. There's jealousy. Anybody ever felt jealousy? Blech. Who wants to even admit that? There's embarrassment. They're very hard to admit. There's racism. Remember last week or the week before, someone gave me that flyer that was put on her windshield to join the white supremacists? Well, it seems like the racists are out there. But if we tell the truth, they're not. There's a man who helps me to teach retreats in New Mexico, who's beginning to learn to teach Vipassana, a psychologist and a good friend named Ralph Steele, who's also a black man from South Carolina initially. And we were talking about racism one day in our conversation. And he said, a few months ago I was going to Germany. He's married to a German woman from Heidelberg. He said, and I went to my black friends, and I said, I'm going to my wife's family and to this town in Germany. And they all said to me, have a good time. I hope it's a terrific trip and so forth. And then I told my white friends that I was going to go. And most of them said, how do you think you'll be treated as a black in Germany? Or what do you think her family will say? Because you've never been there as a black man. And all these kinds of questions. He said, and it felt really weird. He said, and these are friends of mine. My black friends just said, have a good time like you'd say to anybody. But for the friends who weren't black, there was some way in which they still saw me, not just as Ralph, another guy, but as having a certain color. And that's how they related to me. It's very subtle, but it's there. Can you hear that? How we see this. So it's not that it's the KKK or it's the white supremacists. It's what's in ourselves when we look at another human being.